We have to recognize this as a shared responsibility.
It's about ensuring every voice is heard and every person is valued.
Chamber shook with the force of his voice, a gavel's thunder disguised as a man's rage. Judge John Roberts, usually cloaked in the icy calm of authority, snapped mid-sentence. His words came out not as law, not as reason, but as a raw scream echoing across live television. The nation didn't hear a legal argument, they heard the crack of composure breaking. Freeze the frame in your mind. A Supreme Court Chief Justice, the symbol of controlled power, was caught with his mask slipping, and across from him, silent, unblinking, sits Jasmine Crockett. No gasp, no retreat, no quiver of fear, only stillness, the kind of stillness that swallows storms. What happens when the nation's top judge loses his cool and a freshman congresswoman refuses to flinch? The question rang louder than his voice. Did Jasmine, with nothing more than her silence, dethrone decades of arrogance with a single look? Within minutes, the moment was everywhere. Twitter lit up with disbelief, TikTok stitched the clip into endless loops, and YouTube thumbnails froze on Roberts' face mid-yell. Hashtag spun into a frenzy. Roberts' meltdown, a Crockett-com, Frathalook. In a digital world built on noise, it was the silence that people replayed. Because Jasmine's stillness wasn't passive, it was defiance. It was centuries of power crashing into the wall of someone who refused to bend. In that instant, she wasn't just a congresswoman, she became a mirror, reflecting a truth America isn't used to seeing: power exposed, naked and trembling. But don't mistake this for just a clash of personalities. The scream wasn't only about Roberts, it was about what happens when the old guard, certain of its dominance, suddenly realizes the new generation will not play by the rules of intimidation. Crockett didn't have to raise her voice. She had to do something far more dangerous: hold her ground. And as millions rewatched, commented, and shared, the real electricity surged not from his explosion, but from her refusal to move, the kind of cold response that turns a moment into legend. But the moment you'll never forget wasn't the scream. It was what came after. It began as just another hearing, the kind the public half watches with one eye on their phones. A sterile chamber, the familiar shuffle of papers, voices droning about procedure. But this was no ordinary session. This one was carried live, every second broadcast into living rooms, offices, and timelines. No script, no edits, just raw democracy under hot lights. Millions were tuned in, most expecting formality. Instead, they were about to witness history. At the center sat John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States. To many, he is the embodiment of the institution itself. A man who carries the robes not just as fabric, but as centuries of authority stitched into every thread. He knows the weight he bears. When he speaks, it is meant to sound final, immovable. He is not supposed to lose control. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, still considered by many an outsider. Young, direct, a freshman voice, often dismissed as unseasoned. She did not arrive with the armor of tradition, but with the raw fire of people who have been told to wait their turn and refuse to. Her very presence was a contradiction to the hierarchy of that chamber. And that was the clash unfolding: live power versus dignity, status versus authenticity. For Roberts, the moment carried the weight of the court's prestige, the myth of untouchable authority. For Crockett, it carried the weight of every person who has been silenced, every voice that has been told to calm down, sit back, or stay quiet in the face of intimidation. When she spoke, she was not only Jasmine Crockett, she became the stand-in for millions. The stakes were higher than they looked. The cameras didn't just capture words, they captured the test of credibility itself. Could the system still convince the public that authority equals truth? Or would dignity, calm, and authenticity prove more powerful than the volume of a title? This wasn't just an argument. Commentators whispered afterward. It was a stress test of American credibility. And they were right, because in that chamber, what was really being measured was the fault line between two Americas, the one clinging to old symbols of power and the one demanding something real. As the hearing unfolded, you could feel the tension building. Every exchange was another weight added to the scale. The more Roberts leaned on status, the more Crockett leaned on authenticity. The more he tried to dominate with tone, the more she turned his fury into her advantage. And millions were watching. Some leaning forward on couches, others gasping in offices, some secretly replaying on phones under desks. They didn't just see two people, they saw themselves reflected. Which side of America would stand when the moment cracked open? The one that screams to hold on to power, or the one that refuses to bow? What began as a procedure was transforming into a spectacle. The balance of authority was wobbling, and as cameras panned, social media feeds began to flood, and the anticipation grew unbearable. The stage was set for a confrontation no one saw coming. For decades, John Roberts has been the quiet architect of authority. Brilliant, sharp, a mind sharpened in marble halls, he built his reputation as the voice of calm in a world addicted to conflict. He didn't shout. He didn't stumble. He spoke as if every syllable carried the weight of history itself. In the public eye, Roberts was untouchable, an institution wrapped in human form. Yet that reputation came at a cost. Aloofness was mistaken for wisdom, distance mistaken for neutrality. He learned to move above the fray, not within it. To many, that was his strength. But insulation from challenge can also breed arrogance. And over the years on the bench, that arrogance grew quite roots. The irony is impossible to miss. The man who spent decades lecturing others on decorum, wielding words like commandments, lost his own in seconds. His voice, once measured as scripture, broke into a scream broadcast across the nation. The calm judge became the furious man, and in that moment, centuries of institutional gravity cracked like glass. This wasn't the fall of intellect. Roberts is still brilliant. It was the fall of invulnerability. Authority, when wrapped in arrogance, can look unshakable until the mask slips. And in front of millions, it did. Arrogance disguised as authority is powerful but fragile. All it takes is one confrontation where the old rules no longer apply, one challenger who refuses to be cowed. In this story, Roberts' untouchable aura was not stripped by argument, but by exposure. His scream revealed what silence never could, that the throne of authority may be gilded, but it is not unbreakable. Jasmine Crockett's rise was never paved with red carpets or crowned with instant respect. She entered the halls of power as the kind of figure Washington loves to underestimate. Young, outspoken, unapologetically direct, to the establishment she was too raw, too bold, too unwilling to smooth the edges of her convictions. Critics labeled her passion as recklessness, her fire as inexperience, but Crockett knew something her detractors did not. Passion is not the opposite of discipline. It is the fuel for it. Every dismissal, every side glance, every muttered accusation of being too much only hardened her resolve. Where others saw volatility, she cultivated control. Where others expected naivety, she forged clarity. Her struggles weren't abstract, they were personal. She endured the slow burn of being interrupted, talked over, and told to wait her turn. She carried the scars of being underestimated not once, but daily. And while the world was busy misjudging her, she was training in silence, learning when to strike, when to pause, when to let arrogance exhaust itself. So when the moment came when the highest judge in the land erupted in fury, Crockett didn't need to match his volume. She had already mastered the art of turning doubt into discipline. She had already walked through storms of dismissal. She knew the power of stillness, the strength of silence. What looked like composure in that televised clash wasn't born in that instant. It was years of being told she was too loud, too fiery, too much, transformed into the ability to hold her ground with unshakable calm. And in that chamber, facing the scream of a man cloaked in centuries of authority, Jasmine Crockett stood as if she had been preparing her entire life for that exact moment. The exchange began with formality, the usual back and forth of questions and answers dressed in procedure. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Roberts leaned forward, his voice edged with sharpness, the tone not of inquiry but of condescension. He interrupted mid-sentence, cutting Crockett off with the impatience of someone convinced their words mattered more. Each time she tried to speak, he pushed back harder, policing her tone, framing her clarity as aggression. It was a familiar tactic, establish dominance not with substance, but with control of the room. Every sigh, every clipped interjection was designed to shrink her space, to press her into the narrow corner reserved for the underestimated. The unspoken message was clear: stay in line, soften your edges, defer to authority. But Crockett did not flinch. Each pause she took was deliberate, each breath measured. Rather than matching his rising heat, she cooled the air around her. She let silence hang between interruptions, letting the weight of his condescension expose itself. It was a strategy as old as conflict itself. Let the opponent swing harder and harder until their own momentum betrays them. The audience watching at home could feel it. The frustration swelling in Roberts, the patience hardening in Crockett. Millions leaned closer to screens, hearts thudding not from words, but from what those words revealed. The old guard, visibly rattled. The new voice, immovable. And then came the breaking point. Robert's sentences grew shorter, sharper, his face flushing with the strain of being unheard. He raised his voice over hers, tried to cut her cadence in half. Yet every time he attempted to bulldoze the conversation, she met him not with anger but with precision. A glance, a pause, a calm reply that seemed to rob his fury of oxygen. It was unbearable tension. The audience at home wanted to shout on her behalf, to push back against every interruption. Twitter began to ignite in real time. Roberts' meltdown climbing as users clipped seconds of the exchange, captions reading, "He can't handle her calm." On TikTok, the edits appeared almost instantly, looping his interruptions against her steady replies, turning the imbalance into spectacle. The contrast was undeniable. The man who commanded robes and titles was unraveling in real time, while the woman branded as too bold became the embodiment of composure. The more he pressed, the stronger she seemed. The more he rose in volume, the smaller his authority became. Inside the chamber, the silence between their words grew heavier. Crockett's refusal to rush, to stumble, to meet fury with fury became its own kind of weapon. And Roberts, trapped in the rhythm of his own frustration, didn't see what millions watching already did. His control was slipping. The drama no longer belonged to the questions, or the policy, or the decorum of the chamber. It belonged to the simple human truth unfolding before cameras. That arrogance, when unchecked, eventually consumes itself, and as the exchange stretched longer, the audience braced for the inevitable collapse. Because composure is not silence, it is resistance. And in that chamber, it was cutting deeper than any argument. The comments online said what many in the room could not. "She's dismantling him without saying a word." Another viral caption read, "Calm is the loudest voice in the room." Every second felt heavier, every pause more dangerous. The tension had reached its limit, the moment straining like a wire about to snap. And then, the scream. The chamber cracked open with a sound no one expected, a scream. Not a raised voice, not a sharp retort, but a full-throated eruption. John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States, the man who had built a life on composure and command, snapped. His voice split mid-sentence, breaking not into authority but into something raw, jagged, and almost desperate. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Pens froze mid-scratch, eyes darted upward. For a heartbeat, even the microphones seemed to recoil. A man who embodied centuries of judicial gravity had, in one uncontrolled instant, shed the robe of restraint and revealed the trembling man beneath. And then, the silence. Not his but hers. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or shrink or fire back with equal force. She simply stared stone-cold silence, eyes locked, unblinking, lips barely moving as though words weren't even necessary. It was the silence of someone who had seen arrogance before and refused to bend. The contrast was devastating. His scream revealed weakness, her stillness revealed strength. In trying to assert dominance, Roberts handed Crockett the crown. Viewers at home felt it instantly. Online, the clip traveled at lightning speed. Twitter feeds filled with shock. Did the Chief Justice just scream on live TV? TikTok stitched the moment into endless loops, one side showing Roberts' contorted face, the other zooming in on Crockett's steady gaze. YouTube thumbnails froze him mid-yell, her in icy calm beside him. Within hours, hashtags stacked high for Roberts' meltdown, for Crockett calm, for the look. It was more than entertainment, it was a reversal. For decades, Roberts embodied control, now control had deserted him. For months, critics labeled Crockett too fairy. Now her silence became the most powerful fire in the room. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man who once lectured America on decorum lost his own in front of millions. The congresswoman accused of being too bold proved boldness through restraint. Memes began rolling in faster than commentary. One showed Roberts screaming while a caption read, "When Wi-Fi drops for 5 seconds." Another placed Crockett in sunglasses with the caption, "Unbothered Queen." Late-night talk show host replayed the clip again and again, punctuating his outburst with laugh tracks, pausing to marvel at her silence. One commentator said, half joking but not entirely, "In that moment, Jasmine Crockett became the Chief Justice of the United States." But beneath the humor was something heavier. Audiences weren't just laughing at a meltdown, they were watching a transfer of credibility. Authority had slipped from robes to composure, from a scream to a stare. Millions recognized it instantly. Power doesn't belong to the one who shouts the loudest, but to the one who cannot be shaken. And that realization was intoxicating. People who had long felt silenced, overlooked, or dismissed saw themselves in Crockett's unflinching gaze. They replayed her silence not just for entertainment, but for validation. Every retweet, every TikTok edit was more than a laugh, it was a quiet form of rebellion. The scream exposed Roberts, but the silence crowned Crockett. Commentators began calling it a turning point moment, the kind that outlives the headlines. Because what the nation saw wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was the unraveling of a myth that titles and robes can always command respect. That myth collapsed in one scream, and dignity rose in its place. The fallout spread quickly. Panel discussions filled with analysts trying to spin the moment, but the clip spoke louder than any pundit. It wasn't about law or precedent, it was about human truth. When arrogance screams, composure wins. Irony sharpened the moment into legend. Roberts' scream was supposed to silence Crockett. Instead, it amplified her. He had intended to project strength, but only projected fragility. She, with nothing but stillness, became unshakable. The nation saw arrogance undone in real time. In homes, offices, and classrooms, people whispered about the look on her face. Parents pointed it out to their children. That's what standing your ground looks like. Teachers played the clip to illustrate poise under pressure. Activists shared it as proof that the old order was faltering. The scream was no longer his, it belonged to the people who replayed it, reframed it, rewrote it into cultural memory. And yet, as viral as the scream became, it wasn't the end. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't let the moment pass unmarked. Silence was her first weapon, but it was not her last. The calm after the scream was only the setup for what came next. Roberts thought his explosion was the final word. It was not. It was the door opening to a reversal no one could stop. Crockett's stillness had stripped his authority, but her words, carefully chosen, softly spoken, would pierce even deeper. The scream was not the climax. It was the turning point, the moment that flipped the balance, drained the old power of its certainty, and handed the stage to someone the system had tried to underestimate. But Crockett wasn't finished. The silence stretched long enough to sting. Roberts, chest heaving, still radiated the heat of his scream, but the chamber had shifted. All eyes slid toward Jasmine Crockett, waiting for her to flinch, to fight, to fold. She didn't. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady, her voice so low the microphones had to lean in with her. As that, she asked, almost whispering, "What passes for justice?" The word sliced cleaner than any shout. No thunder, no flourish, just the surgical precision of composure. The chamber froze. Robert's anger, once roaring like a storm, collapsed inward. His lips tightened, his jaw clenched, but no reply came. The man who had filled the room with fury could not fill it with reason. The reversal was undeniable. Rage dissolved into humiliation. Chaos crumbled in the presence of calm. It was a duel without swords, and Crockett had disarmed him by refusing to swing. Those watching felt the shift as if gravity itself had changed. The judge, untouchable for decades, now looked small. The congresswoman, underestimated for months, stood taller without moving an inch. On screens across the nation, the moment crystallized. Commentators later argued over the scream, but the people online knew the truth. The scream was forgettable noise. What they shared, replayed, mimed, and captioned was the silence, and the single, cutting question that followed it. Clips labeled, "The Look" and "The Question" flooded TikTok and Instagram Reels. One viral tweet summed it up in 7 words. She didn't need to yell, she won. Another, "Power is composure under fire." By morning, hashtags had evolved for Robert Sellence, fake Crockett crown, Fent the question. In that chamber, the exchange had lasted only seconds. On the internet, it stretched into immortality. The scream was a glitch, an error, a slip of temper. Crockett's quiet reply was the line etched into history. Analysts tried to soften the blow for Roberts, to frame the eruption as passion, as stress, as a rare lapse. But the footage refused to bend. Side by side, the contrast told its own story. The man who shouted until his voice cracked and the woman who, with barely parted lips, flipped the room against him. Even those who had doubted Crockett before found themselves recalibrating. Her critics called her loud, yet she had won with silence. They mocked her passion, yet she had weaponized restraint. In Robert's unraveling, they saw fragility. In Crockett's composure, they saw unshakable dignity. And so the moment became something larger, not just a clash between judge and congresswoman, but a mirror for the nation. Power, the footage seemed to say, isn't inherited through robes or earned by titles. It's proven in the instant when the mask slips, when arrogance screams and dignity whispers back. The scream faded. The silence remained. The roar had ended. The chamber, once brimming with the crackle of confrontation, settled into a strange, weighted quiet. Roberts leaned back shaken, the authority of his robe feeling less like armor and more like fabric stripped of meaning. His voice, so recently raised, so forceful, now carried no command. The echo of his scream hung in memory, not in power. Crockett, by contrast, had not moved. Her breathing remained even, her posture unbroken. In the stillness, her composure spoke louder than any rebuttal ever could. She didn't need to declare victory, she had simply outlasted the noise. For those watching at home, the meaning sank in slowly, almost painfully. This wasn't about volume nor about rank. It was about endurance, about who remained unshaken when the storm passed. Dignity, they realized, was heavier than authority. Clips continued to surge across platforms, millions of eyes rewatching the moment again and again. Each replay stripped away the chaos and spotlighted the contrast, a judge unraveling, a congresswoman steady as stone. In YouTube comments, the sentiment repeated like a drumbeat. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. On Twitter, a viral post captured it in a single line: noise fades, dignity stays. A late-night talk shows turned the incident into both comedy and commentary. Roberts' scream became the punchline, looped, exaggerated, even auto-tuned, while Crockett's silence became the substance. One host quipped, "She taught him the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the quietest person in the room already won." But beyond the humor, a deeper reflection rippled through the nation. Viewers began to ask themselves, what does true power look like? Is it in titles and tradition, or in the ability to hold steady when provoked? Crockett had flipped the script. Authority no longer looked invincible. Dignity did. Even critics grudgingly admitted it. She had not only survived the confrontation, she had transcended it. In Roberts' scream, they saw fragility. In Crockett's silence, they saw resilience. It was the kind of reversal that couldn't be spun away, because everyone had already witnessed it unfold live. And so the reflection settled in. This wasn't about who shouted loudest. It was about who stood tallest after the noise fell away. The nation had watched arrogance collapse in real time and composure take its crown. When the echoes of that chamber finally faded, something else remained. An afterimage burned into the national consciousness. Jasmine Crockett had not just survived a clash with the most powerful judge in the country. She had defined herself in the act of restraint. For days, the headlines refused to move on. Major outlets replayed the confrontation with the kind of intensity usually reserved for historic rulings or national crises. But this time, it wasn't a decision handed down from on high. It was a moment wrestled from the ground up. Crockett stood at the center, no longer just another face in the crowd of young legislators. She had become a symbol composure in the face of chaos. Her rise felt almost cinematic, the very qualities critics once derided. Her sharpness, her boldness, her refusal to soften her edges suddenly appeared as the precise tools needed for the moment. Where others might have cracked, she held steady. Where others might have shouted back, she chose silence. And that silence resounded louder than any speech. Meanwhile, Roberts could not escape the shadow of his own eruption. For decades, he had been the embodiment of judicial poise, the face of institutional steadiness. But one scream, one moment of unmasked frustration, reshaped the narrative. Authority cracked. Arrogance was exposed, and what once looked like unshakable dignity now seemed like fragile performance. It was catharsis in its purest form. The image of arrogance is not one of not by an equal show of force, but by restraint, the kind of poetic reversal audiences crave, the old order unraveling before the calm persistence of the new. And yet, beyond the clash of personalities, the moment carried a larger takeaway. If one scream could topple a crown of authority, what might happen when more voices refuse to bend? When does composure become the weapon of the underestimated? The incident had begun as a televised spat, but it ended as something else: a stress test of credibility, and a reminder that legitimacy is not declared. It is earned in real time. On social media, the conversation shifted from viral amusement to reflective urgency. One viral post asked bluntly, if dignity is stronger than authority, what happens when more leaders realize it? Comment sections turned into forums of possibility, viewers imagining a politics where restraint defeated arrogance, where calm disarmed rage. Crockett's name began appearing not just in clips and captions, but in op-eds, podcasts, and whispered conversations about the future of political leadership. She had not set out to seize the spotlight, yet by holding her ground, the spotlight found her. And once there, it refused to dim. Roberts, on the other hand, faced a slower unraveling. His defenders scrambled to contextualize, to explain, to reframe the scream as stress or passion. But the internet doesn't deal in nuance. It deals in symbols. And in the symbol of that clash, he had lost. The catharsis for audiences was unmistakable. They had witnessed the kind of reversal that felt both shocking and inevitable: arrogance undone by restraint, chaos humbled by composure. It was a release of tension not just in that room, but in the broader public psyche. But the story did not end there. Because if one moment could shift perception so dramatically, what would the next confrontation look like? What new unravelings waited in the halls of power? Crockett had shown the possibility. She had shown that dignity could flip the balance, that restraint could dismantle arrogance in real time. And that left a lingering, electrifying question hanging in the air, one too powerful to ignore. Because if this was only one exchange, what's coming next may change everything. Judge Roberts screamed, but it was Jasmine Crockett's cold response that the world remembers. In that one viral exchange, chaos tried to crush composure, and composure won. The scream faded into noise, but her silence echoed like a gavel striking history itself. That moment wasn't just politics. It was a lesson carved in real time. Calm destroys chaos. And the world watched it unfold, not in headlines or spin, but in raw human truth. A scream that shattered authority, a steady gaze that built something stronger. Now the question turns to you. If you were watching that moment live, whose side were you on? Drop your reaction in the comments below, because this conversation is bigger than the chamber. It belongs to all of us. And if you believe dignity always wins, if you believe silence can shake the ground louder than 1,000 shouts, then hit subscribe. Join the community that refuses to be silenced, that believes calm is the new crown. Because history doesn't just echo in rulings and laws. Sometimes it echoes in a single glance. And one viral silence may echo louder than 1,000 screams.